I mean, compared to Bert, we always look like little guys, but that's okay. That's
all right.
part of it.
I've been losing more weight lately, so
No, it has nothing to do with your weight. I'm just talking about your stature in general.
Okay.
Your tall stature.
Tall.
Okay. Well, it's been a little bit since we have shot a Merit Partners podcast, but what better time to get back into it than the week after Car Week? So I have Jonathan and Bert here with me today. We're going to talk everything Car Week, Monterey, Quail, Pebble, the whole nine. Me and Jonathan went out there. We were part of the team that was there on the ground, and then Bert had a pregnant wife, so he did the right thing and stayed back to be with her. The noble, honorable thing.
Yes, I had some family complications.
Yep.
That, not complications in a bad way.
There you go.
But just some things that I unfortunately wasn't able to come because I needed to be there. So
we missed you, and it also gave you an opportunity to look from the outside in. You know what I mean? You got a different perspective because you weren't actually there, so you got to keep
I got to look out with envy on the fact that you guys were there, enjoying the beautiful weather and the time and the cars and the conversations and I was doing other things.
You were dearly missed. You were dearly missed.
Thank you, Evan.
But you also got a lot of the intel from us while we were there, sending you pictures, sending you stuff. You saw the results of the auctions. So
I did.
Plenty to talk about.
I did.
Plenty to talk about.
I did.
So we want to talk about the auction results and what all of that looked like and meant, but I want to start with Quail. So Quail is arguably the biggest event of the country, of the world.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's where all the manufacturers are.
You know, it started, I read a little article, it started in 2003 where people would wear their cargo shorts and they'd come with their lunch sacks and it was $90. It's gone a long way.
How has it changed so much?
Now
people wear their
finest dress,
brightest
used
suits.
to be able to wear cargo shorts.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Now cargo shorts that you can't get in if you wear cargo shorts.
Yeah. Right. So I know, Bert, you saw a lot of the cars that were unveiled as well during that time, but Jonathan, I want to start with you. What was a car that you saw on your walk around Quail that stood out to you? There was something that, whether it was a new car in the new area or was a car where we had a Burgundy 918 that we were showing, and that was, what was that area called? The History of Supercars? It could be in that area too. What stood out to you?
Yeah, first of all, I mean, I got to see a lot of people there, a lot of friendly faces and clients, and that was, I think the best part was just giving people hugs and reconnecting in one place. I wish we had better cell phone service so we could have connected with everybody, but it was the biggest, I mean, it felt like a trade show, no simple way to put it. I mean, it felt like there were so many different people advertising their wares there, which is great, but also makes for kind of sifting through a lot of different stuff to figure out what the good stuff is. The first thing that I saw that I did really like was the Sonderwunsch program by Porsche Classic. I loved it. They came out. I will tell you, I talked to the right of me was Hurley Haywood and then Grant Lawson, who developed the Carrera GT, and then to the left of me was Horatio and Chris Pagani, both witnessing this Sonderwunsch project, which I was, because it was their friend. But
that was the 993.
It was the 993 Speedster.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was cool to see that respect from those type of people, which is because it brings all these different people together, designers and manufacturers and all that. So they were all there at 1045 to witness that, which was cool.
Yeah.
But my favorite car, hands down, which I've been excited to see and I've been talking about, is outside of the Porsche and Ferrari realm, which is obviously where we spend all of our time, but is the Valkyrie.
Yeah.
And that to me was the coolest car there. Adrian Newey, being able to look underneath the car and see the design. I mean, it looked more like a plane than necessarily a new car and how to operate. But we talk about production numbers, obviously on the usability mark of a car, I think it's going to obviously range fairly low, but on the production numbers, there's
which is the primary thing that drives investment value.
Yeah,
production numbers.
I'm very excited about the Valkyries.
Yeah.
So that was the coolest thing to me. See, it just really stood out. It was different. It was new. So I was very excited.
Rumors were that they fired it up. Were you around it when they fired it up?
I did not see it.
Yeah, I would love to hear that thing in person. That car was special, very unique.
I think it's a great car of our generation.
Yeah,
I'm very much looking forward to how that car hits the market and then how it proceeds over the next 10, 20 years. I think it's going to be a great car.
Agreed. Bert, of all the press and all the pictures and everything you saw, was there something that stood out to you that piqued your interest? I know we don't talk a lot about modern cars, but was there something that piqued your interest?
The short answer is no.
Okay.
Not really. I thought the Valkyrie. I actually agree with Jonathan. I've actually, and typically I wouldn't look in that direction, but what that car has, the NA engine, the 12-cylinder engine, all the things along with the low production numbers are just that recipe that I think that real investors, I want to be in, and that car has some significance that I see standing the test of time. So I think that Jonathan's right on with that. It's right exactly where I think the market wants to be. I think the thing that stood out to me more than your hey, there's some alignment here at Merit Partners. Even though some get left behind, others get still some alignment.
Occasionally you get the
but no, I would say the thing that stood out to me more than anything else was themes and not cars. So it was more the theme of what was going on rather than the car. So I think that, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I think to me, it's really the rise of seeing more restomod built cars, developing cars over what the manufacturers are putting out in terms of new cars. Because I think there's a disconnect now between what manufacturers are putting out and what investors or drivers really want. And so you're seeing even more companies pop up. They're building cars, more models from guys like Singer and Gunther Works being released, Porsche Classic with the Sonderwunsch car and the recommissioned cars. Those are things that are popping up everywhere now. And so I look at, if you really want to, I think, identify the market and be good at understanding what cars to be in, you have to understand the themes going on and be accurate in looking at that before you look at individual cars. You got to look backwards. You can go pick an individual stock, but if you're in the wrong trajectory in terms of where the market's going, you're not going to be in the right place. So you have to understand the prevailing kind of winds and what they're telling you. And I think that's the thing that became really clear to me.
It's funny that you say that, because my favorite car there was the Tut Hill GT1.
There you go.
Redo. An 11,000 RPM air-cooled engine in that thing, 500, 600 horsepower. That car to me, obviously, we have to drive it and see what it's really all about. But that car to me was one of the coolest cars there and the most potential for fun. They unveiled the new Lamborghini, the Huracan replacement, but not to be too critical about it, 900 horsepower, a lot of power. But it's very controversial. It looks kind of like an EV car, to be honest. It's left the design that Lamborghini used to be of loud and brash and air intakes the size of your head. They've gone away from that.
Well, to me, Evan, to that point, I think what's happening now is it's a natural sort of progression. Is that it seems like manufacturers are expanding they're increasing the size of the canvas, so the cars are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So the ducts are getting bigger, the wings are getting bigger, the arrows getting bigger. Everything's just getting bigger. It's not shrinking and becoming more driver-oriented. It's enlarging so they can get around a track faster, and it can handle and manage all the speed and accommodate all the hybrid technology, electric motors, whatever may be in it to do that. And I think that's a mistake, as it concerns longevity of the cars, investment potential of the cars, and also the driving experience that I get in terms of accessible power at lower speeds.
Yeah, so at Quail, being there, like you said, cell phone service, not there. So you have to kind of bump into people, meet people, but we still walked around with a good amount of folks. And Bert, I know you've talked to people. An event like Quail is one of the top events of the year. What are you guys hearing does it align with what you're talking about? Are the conversations around these restomod companies, or have you guys had conversations about the new Zinger, CZ-inger, the car that has seats, front and back, which is wild,
right,
or the new Lamborghini, or the new Koenigsegg? Are you guys having those conversations, or are you having conversations more around?
I'll answer first. I am not having conversations with kind of current new wares that are out there very much. I'm going to be very curious, and I would say I'm slightly concerned about, what would you call it, just the overall market saturation of all these new cars, and how the market's actually going to be able to absorb how many new cars are, and the buyer is really going to be there to participate in the enjoyment of those new cars. I think that would be a chief concern of mine, even in the overall market economy that we're in right now, that everybody's very familiar with, that we don't need to go over. But and I think what's happening is you've got more cars that are coming to the market, fewer number of people that are interested in it, And then you've got people, and this is no surprise, right? And this will kind of be in the direction of where we're headed.
Yes.
But we focus on 90s and 2000s Porsches and Ferraris, right? Cars that we love, cars that we're passionate about, cars that we really consider ourselves to be subject matter experts in, that we're really knowledgeable on. And there's fewer of those cars, right? And so I think we're continuing to have conversations about, hey, let's look back. And that's been a theme, to go on your point,
right.
of something that we've been discussing for
right.
years now and sharing,
right.
And I think that's something. So, that would.
So
be
not much around the new Koenigsegg's, not much conversation around those
not
new
not
cars.
my clients and friends around that stuff. Could be different for other people, but.
Evan, I've had less than 5 of those conversations in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
Nobody's talking about the new stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, except for the fact of how much is it selling over sticker, because I'm thinking about flipping my car. That's the conversations I'm having. In terms of taking a real interest in those new cars and wanting to own those, there's very muted interest in that. And I think that a lot of those cars, when you're talking about, there's not really investment value, there's hype premium associated with the newest, latest, greatest being released. But there's so much volatility in that, downside volatility, in terms of those cars being worth a significantly less amount next year than they would be this year. My view is always to people, the most that car's going to be worth is what it's worth today. And I mean, unfortunately, it's just like you look at wine. It hasn't had time to age. It hasn't had time to really air out and vet and be vetted and to be understood in terms of it's going to be a vintage is going to have any timelessness to it, while other cars have and are just going to continue to ascend during that time. And so, I mean, the cars, as I look around our warehouse, the cars that are right here are the cars that we're going to be talking about in the next 3, 5, 10 years and beyond. Yeah. They're going to be, I wish we'd had more of those. Not being populated by a bunch of the new stuff. Yeah. Not trying to disparage all the new things, but it's the reality of what's going on in the market right now and what's going on in buyer sentiment today. Nobody's excited about the new stuff. They're not, beyond seeing and talking about it and kind of that sizzle. Yeah. But the sizzle quickly goes away, and then the ownership just becomes more of just a lackluster experience.
Yeah. People could say we're biased because it is what we represent, right? And it is our business, and it is the cars that are in here. But I'll tell you what, talking about a fine wine, that Burgundy car, when I was driving around in it, thanks to one of our clients, and also this car behind us, has aged really well. I mean, I'm so into Courage GT, and you guys know that. And I was driving.
Irony is that it's the color of wine.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, perfect analogy.
I did get stuck in some places coming up Carmel in my Courage GT, coming out of Carmel by the Sea, which is very difficult with a clutch like that. To get out of there, but. Then I was in the 918, and I was like, this car has aged so well. You take the tops off, and you get the sound of the naturally aspirated, the V8 with the help of the 2 electric. I mean, that car was just fun and engaging to drive, and that's car. It's 10 years old, and it's like this car is doing so well.
It could have been released yesterday and still had just a ton of excitement.
Well, I love the wine analogy because as a person that loves wine, they actually rate wine in 2 different ways. So they'll rate it as it comes out, right? Like a Bordeaux. They'll rate it when it comes out. They'll give it 100 points, 98 points, whatever it is. But in the description, they're like, I think this will do really well in 20, 30 years. Well, what they do is in 10 and 15 years, they re-rate the wine. So they will go back 10 years and they'll open a bottle that's 10 years old, 15 years old, and they'll re-rate it. And some, it's fascinating. Some will go from like an 88, not a great score, and end up being a 99 because it aged well. So
I think it's aged better. I think it's actually improved in that category.
That's the point, is that a lot of cars haven't had like we saw at Quail. Some are cool, some are loud, but those cars haven't had that opportunity to get re-rated 10 or 15 years down the road.
I think you bring up a great point, and that is if we did a rating today of the new cars and rated what cars do we think are going to be the 100-point cars in the next 10 years, I think the number of those cars that actually we could look at favorably and say that's going to be is unfortunately getting significantly less in number versus 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Agreed. And
what you would assess.
Agreed.
And I think those choices are just going to become more and more limited as the years go on.
Yeah.
So that's a great way of putting it.
Yeah.
It's rate it today versus rate it on future potential of where it's going.
That's right.
And so
that brings me to the market side of this, which is all the auctions that happen out there, right? So you put it as the pre-car week and post-car week when it comes to the amount of emphasis that's put on the values that happen at these auctions. We don't have to go through all the little data points of every single car, but I'm curious your guys' impression after seeing the results of the auction. Do they align with what we're currently talking about? Is there anything that surprised you? Is there something that stood out that was affirming of something maybe we thought was going on? Jonathan, if you want to start.
Let me go first. So I actually have a little interesting take on this because I think that we know the cars that did well, right, in terms of the cars that went up and the cars that went down. But I'm curious to talk about what about cars that were not represented there? The cars that we didn't see come to auction, the cars that didn't actually have a result. Well, why weren't those cars there? That's because the truth is those cars are not trading at the auction. They're trading in private sales or they're trading in quiet forums by which they're not being brought to market. So it's almost, look at the models that maybe weren't represented. Like we talked about yesterday, a 4.0 was not auctioned off. Why is there not a 4.0 there? Well, I mean, so it's things like that. And I think there are examples to look at the cars that it almost speaks louder, the cars that were not there, than the cars that were there. And an overall theme, and again, not to go through exact values, but people are obviously looking for V12s, they're looking for manual, they're looking for cars that are accessible to drive, that they can enjoy, that aren't going to break, that they can start up and go. Those are the cars that are really getting the momentum in this market, right? It's not cars that create a lot of, that are either race cars or cars that you have to go do a lot of work on to get them going. It's cars that you can enjoy in terms of the new collector that we're seeing. But what's happening is the production numbers of those cars is finite, supply and demand. But there's a larger group of people that are entering into that. Collectors that collected stuff, we all know from the 50s and 60s, is moving into that genre, and guys that are now coming into collecting. So there's more people competing over a finite, more definite. So that would be just my overall sentiment. And by the way, the auctions, RM Sotheby's, a lot of people do it really well. The room was filled. There was more people than I had seen. It was very exciting. There was a lot going on, but there was also a lot of cars. I mean, there were a lot of cars at auction, more than I had ever seen. And all the events that were going on, they were busier. So
for sure.
And I mean, Jonathan raises a great point in that, is that, I mean, if you look at the markets and everybody wants to look at, okay, this car did well, so I might need to just buy more of these. It's sort of like watching a stock go up 100% and go, I think I need to buy the stock because it went up 100%. No one looks at the stock that didn't go up, but yet is set up for future appreciation. They always want to look at the stuff that did go up. It's just so interesting that you'd pursue it after it went up. And certainly there's potential for those cars to continue, but to Jonathan's point, I think there were a number of cars that we see as the biggest potential cars that weren't even there or weren't even talked about. And we're not going to get into all those things now, but what we can say is that what the masses see many times and what people see versus really what's going to be driving the market in future years is a lot of times disconnected. And auctions generally are more of they're a latent indicator more than a leading indicator of what's going on in the market. And even you look at like, not to get too scientific here, but you look at like ocean currents, the currents underneath the water, or actual currents, actually affect 80 to 90% of the eventual climate that's going on outside the water. Like all the storms and things like that are affected by the currents underneath the ocean, not what you can see, but it's what you can't see. So it's just kind of interesting as we look at that there's this prevailing current going on behind the scenes that's actually affecting more of the market than what it is seen. And so I think we as advisors looking at this, and this is where we delve into, I know Jonathan and you haven't had lots of conversations with people, and I think there's a lot more value in the conversations that were had as opposed to the cars that were auctioned. Because that's really what you see and get an idea of what people are interested in, what they're really disappointed in or not getting. And then you kind of can, as you get those data points, you begin to get a feel of, okay, here's where it's actually going.
Yeah.
And that to me is a truer indication of market conditions and where it's going than actual cars and what was sold and what wasn't. Because we all know that auctions can be a little bit misleading as well. Some cars can do well that weren't supposed to do well. Others, and there's just randomness. There's the randomness of
who's in the room,
of the auction, who's in the room at the time, who may have had one too many, who may have got caught in an emotion, who maybe had their wife or kids there and said, Dad, I really like that color, where that's not really indicative of what the real worth of the car was. So it can be a little bit misleading on taking those as an overall kind of standard point of that, rather than actually looking at more of a theme of the market.
I do want to talk about one specific car, and this is a conversation that, you know, it didn't perform well, and I want to have a conversation around. We could puff up cars all day long and say, well, F50 sold for $5.5 million, right? Great story, yeah. Why do you guys think the Singers at auction are not performing to the standard that maybe they were 2 years ago?
I'll go first. I think my answer is going to be softer than yours.
I'll try to soften it.
I'll loosen everybody up a little bit. And by the way, the auctions, and I agree, are a confirmation of what we're already experiencing. And I like the way you. That's all they serve to us, right? And I would agree with that. And the best thing that we have in Merit Partners is all those conversations that we're having with clients and collectors and friends, right? That is, we're on the phone all the time, right? It's what we spend our time doing. So we have the indications of what's going on in the market, what people are looking to get into, what they're looking at next, and all that. The Singer, I'll just bring it back very simply to supply and demand. That's how I feel about it. I feel like there are more Singer Classics than there are the demand for the car. And when I'm talking to people, several people don't just have one, they have two, maybe three, they have the next order. And so in my soft way, I will just say I think the demand for that level of that level of car, for $1 million plus car, is not there. And that's simply how I look at it, as basic economics in that sense. And so and I think there's a benefit to speccing your car and enjoying it, in the beginning and going through that process. But I don't think it's delivering the experience that maybe somebody's looking for. It does a lot of things average. Doesn't do one thing very well. It is beautiful to look at, but I think that just the reason that the values are there is because they were hyped up a lot, and they're correcting to really where they should be, and I think they have further ways to correct. And one great example that I have was from a friend. I met him out there for the first time. I got to meet him in person, and we did sell his Singer, and I was educating him towards a Carrera GT. I always knew he wanted a Carrera GT, and he made that decision, and he's sold at what I would think at the right time, and he's going to be buying a Carrera GT with the help of us and the advisement and the fun. We're going to go on the adventure together of finding the right Carrera GT together, and he's going to be really happy with that decision. He's going to market that and and say, "This, I made this, I did this." He'll not only get to enjoy a different car, have a new experience, but he'll also be in a better place than he would be. So that's my softer way of serving up.
I think that's well said. I'll add a few things to that. I mean, look, we can do a whole segment on this because there's a lot to talk about here.
Sure.
But I think a couple of just big points. Big point number one is you're ultimately going to be happier from an investment perspective if you invest in a factory car over a restomod. And Singer is not a factory car. It's a car maker, car designer that has come out with a cool car.
And they do a good job.
But it's not a factory car. Okay, so it has some hype to it. It's not dissimilar to things you see in architecture and design and housing and that kind of thing that kind of is real popular for a while, but then it fades. And factory cars done right and built the right way with meeting the demand over time are just going to continue to receive more and more affection in that sense. And there are going to be fewer and fewer quality examples available. To Jonathan's point, you have now Singer that's falling into a little bit, and look, this is their own kind of strategy. I'm just making an observation. But they seem to be doing what McLaren has done over the years, which is you're releasing another model on top of a model on top of a model on top of a model. So it's not just the number of Singer Classics, it's now you're releasing, I got a slant nose allocation, I got the turbo, I got the DLS, I've got, who knows how many different iterations of these. And so there's a real balance of saying what keeps the mystique alive with what we've built and sort of the allure of what we have versus, okay, that's too much. Now I'm beginning to dilute the brand a little bit. And I think that's what's happened. I think the brand has gotten a bit diluted. I think the Singer Classics have fallen away in terms of they were novel and they were really cool to begin with. They're still that, but they're losing some of that coolness and they're losing some of that novelty because the materials they're using, other restomod makers are using the same materials. They have a very similar look. And the power of the cars is, to drive the cars is, it's an okay experience. It's not a transcendent experience. It's not like driving a Carrera GT. It's not like driving a GT3 RS 4.0.
Yeah.
It's just not. And so I think that's part of it. And so I think you're going to see that with restomod companies is that there's going to be this real fury on trying to, we need to try to develop this next latest greatest car, but I think as a buyer of those, you have to be careful about jumping in on something that is largely unproven and is I think getting away from the model that made that actual underlying car so popular to begin with. To me, the less it looks like the original car, the more you've got to be worried about. So, because to me it gets into now it becomes more of a fad.
Great point.
As opposed to something that's going to stand the test of time. So we think of OEM plus, not complete change. That's what we think. OEM evolved, not OEM changed. I think that's what the recipe for success is with these cars. And I think that's where you get into things like factory recommission and some of the things that the factories are doing that are so interesting as opposed to what the rest of mod makers are doing. And I also think that now I will say this, what is interesting is the market has changed, and you're going to ask this question, Evan, but I will make the observation I think it was fascinating that the F-50 sold for the number that it did, which I fully expected and continue to expect F-50s to ascend and do well. But the fact that the car had been repainted
twice,
exactly, means people are becoming more accepting of repaints, and I think that's part of what you become accustomed to with the restomod makers.
Do you think that's what that car did? Do you think that car made the statement that people are getting more comfortable with repaints? Do you think that's?
I'll finish up and say,
please.
I think that the newer buyer wants to feel like if I paid that much, I want a car that kind of looks a little newer, not the car that has patina all over it. And it's always going. Original paint's going to do well, always. Okay, I'm not making a case for that, but I just mean. The key term here is more accepting of a factory repaint. It depends on who repainted the car too. If Bob's custom paint shop repainted the car, as opposed to Ferrari's painter repainted the car, there's a difference there. Yeah. But I think, in for good reason, I think that there's a little bit more of an acceptance there because you really you've just changed paint. You haven't changed what the car is, the essence of the car, which is. You haven't changed production numbers. You haven't changed. You've just made a car that's already going to be a sensational car for years to come, and you've just freshened it a little bit. You've OEM evolved it, OEM plussed it, in my opinion.
That car, in my opinion, was an outlier for the week because it was the only F-50 for sale. So if you went to Car Week to buy an F-50,
that was the one.
That was the only one available offered to you, and people get emotional in the room and things happen. I mean, that's just the result. That car I don't think is an indicative of the market. However, it was getting the wins of, the tailwinds of an F-50 market that we know is going to continue to be healthy and good because people are moving into that car.
But to your point,
and it was a U.S. car.
But to your point, because those are such great cars, and those are anchor cars that are going to be investment cars, they're never going to be 10 F-50s at an auction. They're just not. Now, what you did see is you saw a lot of new cars and newer cars being, and multiple examples of those. How many F-50s? Get ready. There's never going to be more than one or two F-50s at any auction, if at all. And I think that's more of that part about it. Jonathan's made the point of it's not what was there, it's what was not there, or what was there but in much smaller numbers.
Right.
I think that's where you kind of peek behind and go,
That's a great point.
oh, okay, that's interesting to look at.
Yeah.
And I think for the overall market, just to say where we're at right now, an overall generalization, that what we're seeing is that in the market segment that we're in, is that really good cars, A-level cars, are still doing very well. They're very sought after. They're almost actually like selling very, very quickly, right? And then kind of the middle market, the B or C cars are sitting on the market for longer, sitting 90, 120 days. And then the stuff that just either has a story or really, frankly, during COVID, I mean, I know of even Carrera GTs that we're selling or other cars that weren't inspected, you didn't do your diligence, and you really have a problem now because you didn't take the time to have an expert look at the car, and now you're just trying to, some of those cars are just not selling, right? And so, and I think that's the market that we're in from an overall standpoint, and then you got to segment it into the class of car that it's in, right? Is it in Porsche? Is it in Ferrari? Is it in Lamborghini? Is it in McLaren? And then what year is it, right?
Yeah.
So there are different market segmentations around this, but I think overall, that's what we saw, and I think that the F50s in that case from the repaint benefited from a couple of those things that we just mentioned.
Well, I think that's a great way to wrap it up. I think one of my favorite things about this week in general is the conversations that happen because of it. The follow-up calls you get about what happened and what was it like, and sorry I missed you in some cases of guys that were out there, but the overall conversations that happen because of Car Week, whether it's there or after, it's one of my favorite things about the week, to be honest. So that being said, if you guys have any questions, I mean, this is why we do this. This is why we sit down for 30, 45 minutes and have a discussion. We want to hear from you. We want to have a discussion with you if this is something you want to get into. These cars we're sitting around right now, if you want to understand a little bit more about it. So please ask us, reach out to us on our website. Come visit us.
I think another really fun thing that was opening the space, and I know you're concluding right now.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I think follow-up conversations that we got to see people is now we're inviting people to come see us, right? Come sit down for an advisory appointment, or come sit down to meet us to
I met
experience
someone
these cars or
at
drive.
Quail that is going to be coming here.
That's
Yes.
it, and
Yes.
that's what we're looking for, right? Is face-to-face relationships with people that that we enjoy
That's right.
both ways. And so I think that would be one thing to say too. If somebody watches this and wants to see, hey, I want to come to Atlanta, Georgia, and have an experience and looking at these cars, please come see us.
That's
And
right.
we're going to be releasing a lot more content like this as well around these advisory things that you can begin to look at as a series where we play up more of these ideas that we were talking about today. We just kind of scratched the surface, but there's a lot more to
Get
talk
in the
about.
cars, talk about the cars, talk
Exactly.
about the market more.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so let us know what you guys think and want to see. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.